Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode. Welcome back to Where They're Planted. This podcast is about parenting kids as they are, meeting them right where they're at, and learning to grow alongside them. My name is Jen Bluske, occupational therapist, parent coach, and most importantly, a parent. I intend to use my expertise to lend understanding and inspire authentic shifts in how you meet your unique child right where they're planted. So, in this part 2 of our series on communication with big feeling or challenging kids, we are going to dig a little bit deeper. In part 1, we focused on what I would consider the foundations, our own regulation as it relates to communication, our active and reflective listening, the power of the pause, consent in communication, and speaking to our kids' developmental levels and individual neurobiology. Today, I'm going to take it a bit further beyond actually the words that we're using and dig a little bit deeper into everything else that surrounds it. We are going to start with nonverbal communication because our facial expressions, our posture, our tone, our volume can shift the communication no matter what the words we're saying. Then we're going to look at the setting and timing. How do we decide the setting and timing of communication with our kids, which can be everything? We're going to talk about environment a little bit, about why sometimes the most powerful conversations that we have with our kids happen in sort of the most passive sort of situations. And then we are also going to zoom in a little bit on overall family communication patterns. Now, that's a big, deep topic, and I'm just going to kind of glaze the surface of it because I do think it needs to be said in this bigger conversation of communication in our parenting, and really talk about that invisible dance that we all do in our communication, whether it's within parenting or not, but really with the focus of how it affects our parenting. And we're going to just talk about some common cycles that happen in that dance in family systems with communication. And the goal being that within these 2 episodes that you have just a lot of information to stew on, sit with, try out, decide how you might want to shift your parenting communication moving forward. So let's dive in. I am going to start with the idea of nonverbals. So really, nonverbal communication is anything that isn't the actual language that we say. What we know about nonverbal communication, what the studies are showing, is that 80 to 90% of the information that you get in an interaction with another person happens through the nonverbal communication. I don't know if there's anybody else out there right now living life in this society with a lot of relationships primarily happening through text, right? Because it's hard to get together with friends and it's easy to just touch base with people during the day via text. And I don't know about y'all, but it's driving me absolutely nuts. The reason it's driving me nuts is because text literally takes all of the nonverbal cues, all of the nuance out of communication. And not only that, it intentionally is meant to shorten our word number because we are literally typing it onto a teeny tiny screen. And so it takes communication and it sort of flattens it. It creates a flatness. so that the same things can be said and it could be meant or read 18 different ways. And so when I'm really thinking about what are nonverbals and how does it support our communication, that is sort of an extreme example that I don't know about y'all, but I'm finding so much in my personal life right now. It's just really challenging. It's really challenging because it's pulling a good portion of the communication away from our interactions, which is what leads to connection. So let's just define a little bit about what nonverbals are. It's really about what you do with your body. So nonverbals are our facial expression, our posture, our proximity to somebody, our gestures that we're using. I know that, on this podcast, most of you are just hearing me, so you can't see my body language and my eye contact and things like that. However, in this format, you can pick up on some of my other nonverbals. So my other nonverbals are going to be my tone of voice, my pace, my volume. Those nonverbals are also going to give you a whole lot of information, more than just what my words are. Now, why is this so important? First of all, because as I've said, 80 to 90% of communication happens nonverbally, right? So a lot of what the intended communicative intent isn't with our words anyway. Secondly, if we're working with our dysregulated nervous system and or neurodivergence, our nonverbal communication can be turned up dramatically so that heightened perception that kids, anybody, can pick up on during times of dysregulation and or by just having a neurodivergent brain wiring can really spark those nonverbals. I have had child after child after child tell me that my insides and my outsides either were or were not matched. This has happened over my entire career. And finally, I had a couple kids be able to say to me, and when I asked, like, what do you mean? Matched means that my nonverbal communication, what I'm bringing from a nonverbal perspective, is matched to what they're perceiving in my body. And that means that my words are matching what they're experiencing. So, an example of that being, I could say to a child, compliment them or give them praise on completing a hard task, let's say a puzzle. I can say something like, wow, you did such an amazing job with that puzzle today. I noticed that you worked really hard, that you pushed through and I couldn't get that piece and it was tricky. Okay, so my words are saying one thing. And I don't know if you heard my tone, but my tone gave a lot of information as well. I could also say it in a way of, nice job with the puzzle, right? My tone, my intentionality is a lot different. Kids can pick up on that like wildfire. Okay. This one also happens in parenting when we may be having a trickier day and we say, I'm fine, everything's fine, right? Well, but our nonverbals are giving incredibly strong cues of, I am not okay. So that's that matching. And so when I think about using matched nonverbals in communication or intentional nonverbals in communication, I am not only considering the words I'm saying, I'm considering all of the other good stuff around it. I'm considering that body language. I'm considering that voice rate, volume, and tone. And so I can guide the communication style based on what I say. Some ways to do this might be shifting your body so that it looks less imposing, right? This is where I might kneel or sit down at eye level. Maybe not eye contact. Eye contact can sometimes be overwhelming. It's seen as threatening, but at least in general range to a child. I might shift my shoulders or my stance to show something that's a little bit more closed, like just a little, not like I'm ready to start a race, but more that I'm relaxed on the couch sense with my body. I might specifically create some physical space when I know I'm communicating something that might be a little bit more intense, reactionary, challenging in a communication, right? I'm not going to get really, really close to a child when I'm saying something like, gosh, I noticed you didn't get your homework done, right? I'm going to give a little bit of space intentionally from a body language perspective in order to help cue that nervous system that, yeah, we are having this communication, but I'm going to keep giving these cues of safety. I might make sure that my face is soft or that my face is incredibly animated, depending on the type of communication I am attempting to do. And so, as you can see, this is super nuanced work. Some of us in this world, myself being one of them, have been told their whole lives that you can read whatever I'm thinking right on my face. And some of us in this world have faces that give less away, right? This is our nonverbals. It can support you in both ways, right? For somebody whose emotions they can kind of read on their face in a pretty overt way, that means that there needs to be a little more intentionality in order to communicate in a way that softens my internal experience or is very clear about my internal experience. For some parents out there, and this is often more typical of the parents I work with, is because we live in an adult society that's really fast and we're moving quickly and emotion isn't necessarily the top priority, right? We've talked about that on this podcast, that idea of emotional intelligence, where I have to help parents rediscover their nonverbals and how they can use their body to portray the rest of the communication that they're trying to communicate, the rest of the intent of what they're trying to communicate. And so I encourage you, play with this for yourself in your own system as you explore using nonverbals more intentionally in communication with your kids. One of the little games that I play, which I know is really, really silly, but it can be done in full privacy, is just to pay attention in the mirror to what your face is doing, right? I think that if we're not incredibly embodied, and we're going to be doing an embodiment podcast coming up here, in tune with our body experience, we kind of need that visual cue sometimes of what our face is looking like in different intents. And so, right, in the bathroom with the door closed by yourself, pay some attention to what your face is looking like when you think about something that makes you frustrated, think about something that's joyful, and see what that external experience is for somebody who might be seeing it. It's just a way of touching back in with our nonverbals in our environment. The other thing you can do is really invite our kids to have a conversation about nonverbals, right? When my voice gets really loud, what happens for you? Right? I grew up in a house with yelling, not always angry yelling. We were just loud, right? But for some systems, loudness is going to be tagged as a fear or a fight flight response. And so, really tuning in to what those nonverbals are doing can help us be much more effective in our communication. The second thing to really think about in our communication of what I want to talk about today that has nothing to do with the words that we're saying is the setting and the environment, and what that setting and environment in communication, how we can use that to our advantage in order to support sort of more connected communication for our kids. And something I have learned over the course of parenting and also in my work, sometimes with some kids who have some pretty big dysregulation, is how to shift the environment quickly in order to create more power in the communication and how to choose that. Something I've learned is that an environment where you don't necessarily have to be face to face with somebody can sometimes feel a little less threatening to have a more challenging conversation, right? I use side by side all the time, both in parenting and in my work. Side by side means when we're driving in the car, right? we're in close proximity. Usually there's less going on. The environment is pretty modulated typically in the moment, but there doesn't have to be that face to face walking together, right? Again, it's a side by side activity. The environment can be shifted in order to support a more effective communication. Being engaged in an activity together, cooking, drawing, sensory bins can be a way of supporting more difficult communication in a way that's more successful. Also, adding regulation tools, right? Adding blankets, fidgets, cozy spaces, a place where a kid can hide, right? This is like under the covers in their bed while we have a conversation is sometimes incredibly powerful. I feel like as parents in the moment, it's so easy to get into a routine of my child brought something up, so we have to address it right in this moment. And right in this moment, we're in the middle of 700 things. And so in those times, often the communication, it isn't very connected. The child doesn't feel very seen and heard, and usually regulation goes offline pretty quick. And so, circling back to the podcast, my last podcast on communication, when we talked about the power of the pause, right? It's okay to say, you know what? Gosh, we're going to really need to talk about this. Let's do that when we get home and when we're making cookies together tonight. Setting up that environment in order to really support our kids having that successful communication together. Along those lines, timing and pacing. When we start to talk not only environment related, but when and how much information. I call this dosing of communication, especially if it's a big concept or a big topic or one that's fraught with shame or distress. Things to think about when we're thinking about timing and pacing. Timing is really regulation based. Bringing up a conversation, giving a lot of directions, giving a lot of new information during moments when kids might not be as regulated after school, right? Immediately before bed, when really hungry, isn't usually going to be effective. Now, sometimes we do need to give communication during those times, right? But then we're going to circle back to shifting the developmental pattern, right? Shifting it down as little language as possible to get the point across, to get the need met. We're going to use our own regulation. We're going to do a lot of those things in order to support if the communication has to happen in the moment, right? Get in the car, put your seatbelt on. Might have to happen. We're going to pay real close attention to our nonverbals during that time. But if we can time and pace our communication so that there's safety and comfort on board, so that we dose it in just little doses at a time, one topic at a time, giving places for pause, that timing and pacing creates so much more effective communication. I know that in my parenting experience, especially when my kids got a little bit older into their teenage years, the topics of conversation got so big and so fraught. And I know this happens a lot around like screens right now with a lot of kids, and really thinking about the idea, at least in our head as parents, that this communication is going to be in episodes. We're not going to finish or solve right now. I know that for me, that really helped so that I could pace and time the communication, knowing that we would have a start of it, maybe get somewhere where we, just needed to pause because of regulation or because we were still kind of both on different pages. And then knowing that we could circle back to it had a more successful communication outcome than me coming in as a parent and bulldozing through what was going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not setting boundaries. If there's a strong boundary you need to set, I'm so sorry, sweetie, you can't go to the party this weekend. No, you can't go to your friends to play after school today. No, I can't get you a phone. Whatever it is, if there's a boundary that you need to set as a parent, by all means set it. That doesn't mean the conversation doesn't stop, though. That doesn't mean the communication isn't going to stop. Setting the boundary and communication are frankly two separate things. There's typically a whole lot of communication that's still going to be happening, even though you have set the boundary. And truthfully, from a developmental perspective, And from an autonomy perspective and from a safety perspective, that communication that happens even after you've set the boundary is the good stuff. It's challenging and it's the good stuff. It's the stuff that helps our kids learn how to handle distress, learn how to communicate need, learn how to communicate emotionality. And so those long-standing conversations through small periods of dosing can be really powerful. And then the last thing I want to talk about today is that idea of our family communication patterns. What I mean by that are two things. The first is in a family system, whatever your family system is, what are the roles that each person likes to play, right? The ones I often see are the over communicators, the ones who shut down communication, the ones who are always trying to fix within communication, the ones who communication comes out in these like explosive bursts. Okay. No judgment. Pay attention. Pay attention to how each person in your family tends to show up in communication. I know that, as a parent, often, we want things to be fixed. We want to make sure our children are learning, right? And is that the role that you want to continue to play? Our children are learning off of our communication patterns, right? And so if we're the parent who's constantly needing to get our point across and making sure that we're being heard and saying it over and over again, that's the communication pattern that's being modeled for your child. If we're the parent when things get challenging, shut down and stop talking, that's the communication pattern that's being modeled in the relationship. What that often leads to are these sort of communication loops, I'll say, that happen in parent-child relationships, right? And it usually goes something like child needs something and escalates. Parent lectures and explains. Child either shuts down or explodes. Parent escalates. Repeat until eventually there's probably going to be some disconnection that happens in the relationship. Once you've identified that communication pattern a little bit, well, now we've got somewhere to go with it, right? Now we can interrupt it. Again, as I've said before around emotionality and boundary setting, it is always the parent's job to start the creation of change in these moments because we are the adult, we are the parent. And so to change a pattern like that, if you happen to be an over-explainer parent or a fixer parent in our communication style and your child escalates, you could pause. You could fall into just active and reflective listening. You could create some humor. You could honor regulation and ask for a break to regulate. Just that little shift, that little rupture. I'm not saying it's going to fix the pattern immediately because no patterns are supported after just one iteration. However, just that little shift from you is going to shift the communication back and forth. What we're looking for is a new pattern. We're looking for those little tiny shifts of, ooh, mom paused when I started saying, everything is wrong and I don't like you because you won't let me go to my friends. And instead of being like, well, honey, I let you go to your friends last week. And if I let you go to your friends tonight and all the things, if you just stop and say, that's really frustrating. Even though everything in you wants to explain or fix, it gives your child's brain an opportunity also to shift in some way. It pulls online some of the more healthy communication patterns in order to create the change. And so as we think about communication, as you can see, it's a big topic, right? Communication with the intent of connection as opposed to correction, with the intent of authenticity, with the intent of truly seeing our kids and their experience while still being the benevolent leader of the family, takes some time and is incredibly nuanced. And the beautiful thing is that we don't have to do it all at once. I encourage you to pick one of these strategies that we've talked about over the last 2 episodes and just play with it a little bit. Play with what happens if I shift my nonverbals. What happens if I this week just focus on reflectively listening what my kid says? What if this week I intend to pause and count to 5 before I respond to anything? You can even let your child in to what you're doing. I'm trying to do it a little bit different. Before I answer you, I'm just going to pause so that I can make sure that the words that come out of my mouth are what I really mean. See what happens in that. Our kids aren't asking us to show up in perfection. What they're really looking for is how we shift ourselves. That's their guidepost of how they shift themselves. And communication is a big one to practice this with. And so I encourage you to give it a try this week. All right, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Hello, parents. I'm Jen, the founder of Thriving Parents Collective, and I want to take a moment to speak to you directly from the heart. As a parent myself, I understand the joys and struggles that come with raising kids in today's fast-paced world. When I started this journey, I felt overwhelmed and very unsure. I realized that we all need a little support and guidance along the way. That's why I created Thriving Parents Collective, because I believe that every parent deserves to feel empowered and confident in their parenting journey. Our personalized coaching and courses are designed to meet you exactly where you're at. We can help you gain clarity, build stronger connections, and navigate the challenges of raising your unique child. Together, we can create a nurturing environment where both you and your child can thrive. If you're ready to take the first step towards a more fulfilling parenting experience, I invite you to visit us at thrivingparentscollective.com and schedule your free discovery call. Let's embark on this journey together. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.